Billionaire woman laughed at the black mechanic. Fix this engine, and I'll marry you. Then she apologized. The day had started like any other Tuesday for Isabella Sterling, with a 5 a.m. spin class, a green juice that tasted like lawn clippings, and a board meeting that was about as exciting as watching paint dry. She was the CEO of Sterling Innovations, a title she had inherited along with her father's fortune and his uncanny ability to make people feel small. She was good at her job. Ruthless, some said. Efficient, she preferred. She had taken her father's tech empire and expanded it, her ambition a relentless engine that propelled her forward. But today, that engine was sputtering. Her custom-built, one-of-a-kind Sterling supercar, a sleek silver beast that cost more than most people's houses, had decided to die on the side of a dusty, forgotten highway in the middle of nowhere. The irony was not lost on her. The woman who built her empire on cutting-edge technology was now stranded by a machine. I don't pay you a small fortune to tell me you can't fix it, she snapped into her phone, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Her personal assistant, a perpetually flustered young woman named Chloe, was on the other end of a line. I'm sorry, Ms. Sterling, Chloe stammered. The dealership said they can't get a tow truck out to you for at least 3 hours. They've never seen a car like yours before. Of course, they haven't, Isabella muttered, ending the call with a frustrated sigh. She ran a hand through her perfectly styled blonde hair, the gesture doing little to soothe her frayed nerves. She was already late for a gala, a vapid affair she had no desire to attend but was contractually obligated to. She scanned the desolate landscape. Nothing but sun-scorched earth and the occasional tumbleweed. Then, like a mirage, she saw it, a small, dilapidated sign that read, Jackson's Garage. We'll fix anything with a motor. Hope, a feeling she rarely indulged in, flickered within her. She grabbed her designer handbag, locked her useless car, and started walking. The garage was even more rundown up close. The paint was peeling, the windows were grimy, and a collection of rusted-out cars littered the yard like metallic skeletons. It was the kind of place she would normally speed past without a second glance. But today, it was her only option. She pushed open the creaky door, a small bell announcing her arrival. The air inside was thick with the smell of oil and sweat. A man was hunched over the engine of a vintage Mustang, his back to her. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark skin glistening with a thin sheen of perspiration. His hands, stained with grease, moved with a practiced, almost surgical precision. "Excuse me," she said, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. He didn't turn around. "Give me a minute." Isabella bristled. She wasn't used to being told to wait. "I don't have a minute. My car, a Sterling, has broken down on the highway. I need it fixed. Now." He finally straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. He turned, and for the first time, she got a good look at him. He was handsome in a rugged, unpolished way. His eyes, a warm, intelligent brown, held a hint of amusement. "A Sterling? Ho," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone. "Never worked on one of those before." "It's a very complex piece of machinery," she said, a condescending edge to her tone. "I'm not sure you'd be able to handle it." He chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the floor. "I've rebuilt a 1967 Shelby GT500 from the ground up. I think I can handle your fancy toy." Isabella felt a flush of annoyance. "It's not a toy. It's a feat of engineering." "Right," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Well, let's go take a look at this feat of engineering, shall we?" He followed her out to the highway, his long strides easily keeping pace with her brisk walk. When they reached her car, he circled it, his expert eyes taking in every detail. "Nice car," he said, his voice betraying a genuine appreciation. "Custom job." "Of course," she said. "There's only one in the world." He nodded, then popped the hood. He leaned over the engine, his brow furrowed in concentration. For a long time, the only sound was the gentle hum of the wind and the distant cry of a hawk. "Well?" she finally asked, her patience wearing thin. He looked up, a smudge of grease on his cheek. "It's the alternator, and the battery is fried. Can you fix it?" He shrugged. "I can, but it'll take time. I'll have to order the parts." "How long?" "A day, maybe 2." Isabella's heart sank. 2 days? I have a gala to attend tonight. I can't be stuck here for 2 days. He leaned back against the car, crossing his arms over his chest. Looks like you don't have much of a choice. She stared at him, a wave of frustration and helplessness washing over her. She was Isabella Sterling. She didn't get stuck. She didn't have to deal with greasy mechanics in the middle of nowhere. There has to be another way, she said, her voice tight. He raised an eyebrow. Unless you know how to rebuild an alternator, this is the only way. She looked at him, at his grease-stained hands and his confident smirk, and a reckless, impulsive idea took root in her mind. It was absurd, it was childish, but she couldn't help herself. Fine, she said, a bitter smile on her lips. Fix this engine, and I'll marry you. The words hung in the air between them, a ridiculous, impossible promise. She expected him to laugh, to call her bluff, but he didn't. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then, to her utter shock, he held out his hand. You've got yourself a deal. Isabella stared at his outstretched hand, her mind struggling to catch up with the reality of the situation. His palm was calloused and stained with grease, a stark contrast to the manicured hands she was used to shaking. This couldn't be happening. It was a joke. A stupid, arrogant joke that had backfired spectacularly. She let out a short, sharp laugh, hoping to shatter the absurd tension. You're kidding, right? I was being sarcastic. His smile didn't waver. His eyes, however, held a glint of steel that told her he was anything but kidding. I'm not. A deal's a deal. You want your car fixed, we have an agreement. He wiggled his fingers, waiting. Or do you want to call that tow truck and wait 3 hours for them to tell you they can't help? Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at her skin. He had her cornered, and he knew it. She was Isabella Sterling, a woman who negotiated multimillion-dollar contracts before breakfast, and she was being outmaneuvered by a backwards mechanic. The humiliation was a bitter pill to swallow. This is ridiculous, she snapped, pulling her hand back as if his was hot. I'm not going to marry you. Didn't say you had to, he said, his voice infuriatingly calm. Just said we had a deal. I fixed the engine. You owe me a marriage. You can always break the contract. I'm sure a woman like you is used to that. But I get the feeling you're someone who honors her word, no matter how stupid. He was goading her, she knew, poking at the one thing she valued more than her fortune, her integrity. Her father had drilled it into her. A Sterling's word is their bond. It was the foundation upon which their empire was built. She glared at him, her mind racing. She could call his bluff, walk away, and deal with the consequences. But the thought of being stranded here, of the gossip that would inevitably follow, was unbearable. She needed a car. She needed to get back to her life. With a sigh of utter defeat, she slapped her hand into his. His grip was firm, warm, and sent an unexpected jolt through her. Fine. You have a deal. Now, can you please get my car off the side of the road? A slow, triumphant grin spread across his face. Pleasure doing business with you, Ms. Sterling. He finally dropped her hand, but the warmth of his touch lingered. Name's Jackson, by the way, but you can call me Jax, since we're practically engaged. Isabella felt a fresh wave of horror. Don't call me that. Call you what? Ms. Sterling? Seems a little formal for my future wife. Just fix the car, she said through gritted teeth. Jax chuckled and pulled out an old flip phone. After a brief, mumbled conversation, he hung up. My cousin's on his way with the tow truck. Should be here in 10 minutes. In her world, that was an eternity. She leaned against her dead supercar, the sleek metal cool against her back, and watched him. He seemed completely at ease, a man in his element. He whistled a tuneless melody, his eyes scanning the horizon. He was an enigma, a puzzle she couldn't solve, and it was driving her insane. True to his word, a rusty tow truck rumbled into view 10 minutes later, driven by a younger version of Jax with the same easy smile. They loaded her car with an efficiency that surprised her, and soon she was crammed into the cab of the truck, her designer dress feeling absurdly out of place. The town, if you could call it that, was a single strip of road with a handful of buildings that looked like they hadn't been updated since the 1970s. There was a diner, a post office, a general store, and, to her utter dismay, a single motel with a flickering neon sign that read, "The Dusty Spur." "I'll drop you at the motel," Jack said from the driver's seat of the tow truck. "You can get checked in while I get started on your car." "The motel?" she repeated, her voice laced with dread. "I can't stay there." He glanced at her, an eyebrow raised. "You got a better idea? The Ritz-Carlton is about 200 miles that way." He jerked a thumb down the highway. She pulled out her phone, ready to have Chloe book her a helicopter, a private jet, anything to get her out of this nightmare. But then she saw it, no service. The words mocked her, a digital confirmation of her complete and utter isolation. She was trapped. The room at the Dusty Spur was even worse than she had imagined. The carpet was a questionable shade of brown, the bedspread was a faded floral pattern, and the air smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and despair. She dropped her handbag on the lumpy bed and sank down, feeling the first stirrings of a full-blown panic attack. This couldn't be her life. She was supposed to be at a gala, sipping champagne and making small talk with people she despised. Instead, she was in a Fleabag motel in the middle of nowhere, engaged to a man who probably thought fine dining was the local diner. She spent the next hour pacing the small room, her heels clicking on the linoleum floor of the tiny bathroom. She tried her phone again and again, but the no-service message remained. She was cut off, adrift in a sea of mediocrity. Finally, unable to stand the confinement any longer, she decided to walk back to the garage. She needed to see that he was actually working, that this wasn't some elaborate prank. When she arrived, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the yard. The garage was filled with the sound of clanging metal and the low hum of a radio playing a classic rock station. She peered through the open bay door and saw Jax, his back to her, leaning over the engine of her car. He moved with a fluid grace, his hands a blur of motion. He wasn't just a mechanic, he was a craftsman, an artist. He seemed to have an innate understanding of the complex machinery, his touch both gentle and firm. For a moment, she forgot her anger and was simply mesmerized. He must have sensed her presence because he turned, a wrench in his hand. "Can't stay away. How?" "I wanted to check on your progress," she said, her voice more subdued than before. "I've got the old alternator out," he said, gesturing to a greasy piece of metal on the floor. "Just waiting on the new one. Should be here in the morning." "So, you can't finish it tonight?" He shook his head. "Nope. Looks like you're stuck with me for another night, fiancé." She ignored the jibe. "What am I supposed to do for dinner?" she asked, the question sounding petulant even to her own ears. He wiped his hands on a rag and leaned against the workbench. "The diner's open for another hour. Best burgers in the county." She wrinkled her nose. "I don't eat burgers." He let out a long-suffering sigh. "Of course, you don't. What does a billionaire heiress eat? Anyway, gold-plated kale." "I'm a vegetarian," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. He stared at her for a long moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. "You know what? I think I can whip something up. Close up shop in a few. Meet me at the house behind the garage in 30. Before she could protest, he turned back to her car, leaving her standing in the doorway, a mixture of confusion and intrigue swirling within her. She had a choice. She could go to the diner and choke down a greasy veggie patty, or she could see what the mysterious mechanic had to offer. Against her better judgment, she found herself walking towards the small, unassuming house 30 minutes later. The lights were on, and the sound of sizzling and the smell of garlic and herbs wafted through the open window. It was a smell that reminded her of something, a distant memory she couldn't quite place. She knocked on the door, and Jax opened it, a clean t-shirt replacing his greasy work shirt. "Come on in," he said, his smile genuine and, for the first time, without a trace of mockery. The inside of the house was a shock. It was clean, minimalist, and surprisingly modern. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with everything from classic literature to complex engineering textbooks. On a small table in the corner, a laptop was open, its screen displaying a complex schematic that looked nothing like a car engine. It looked more like the blueprints for a satellite. He saw her staring. "Just a little side project," he said, quickly closing the laptop. "Hungry?" He led her to a small kitchen where a pan of roasted vegetables and pasta was on the stove. It looked and smelled delicious. He served her a plate, and she sat down at the small wooden table, feeling a strange sense of dislocation. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the clinking of their forks. The food was incredible, better than many of the expensive restaurants she frequented. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" she asked, genuinely curious. "You pick things up when you travel," he said vaguely, his eyes on his plate. "And the books?" she pressed, gesturing to the shelves. "The laptop?" He met her gaze, and for a fleeting second, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a shadow of a life she couldn't begin to imagine. It was the same look he'd given her at the crash site in a terrifying, fragmented memory. "I'm a man of many talents," he said, his voice low and even. "You'd be surprised." The air was thick with unspoken questions. Who was this man? This small-town mechanic who cooked like a gourmet chef and had schematics for a satellite on his computer? Her phone, which she had placed on the table, suddenly buzzed, the screen lighting up. A single bar of service had appeared, a lifeline back to her world. An alert from her security team flashed across the screen. "Security alert. Unusual activity detected. Project Chimera accessed from an unsecured network in your vicinity." Isabella's blood ran cold. Project Chimera was her company's most guarded secret, a revolutionary piece of military-grade cloaking technology. There were only 5 people in the world who had access to it, and the access point was being traced to a small, insignificant town in the middle of the desert. Her eyes shot up from the phone to Jax, who was watching her, his expression unreadable. And then she knew. It wasn't a coincidence. None of it was. Her car breaking down, the isolated location, the man with 1,000 secrets. He knew what Project Chimera was, and he was the reason her car was dead on the side of the road. The silence in the small kitchen was suddenly deafening, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. The delicious pasta turned to ash in Isabella's mouth. She pushed her plate away, her appetite gone, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. "You," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. She held up the phone, the security alert glowing like a beacon of betrayal. "This was you. You didn't just happen to be here. You sabotaged my car. You accessed my most secure project. Who the hell are you?" Jax leaned back in his chair, his calmness a stark, infuriating contrast to her rising panic. He didn't deny it. He simply picked up his fork and took another bite of pasta, chewing thoughtfully before he spoke. "Your security team is fast. I'll give them that," he said, his tone conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. "But they are not as fast as they think they are." "Don't play games with me," she hissed, slamming her hands on the table. "I have a direct line to the Department of Defense. I can have a team of federal agents here in an hour. You've committed corporate espionage, treason." "Go ahead," he said, gesturing to her phone with his fork. "Make the call. But before you do, you might want to ask yourself why a simple mechanic would risk everything to get your attention. To steal my technology, obviously. If I wanted to steal it, I would have done it already," he countered, his voice dropping, losing its easygoing cadence and taking on a hard, serious edge. "I wouldn't have disabled your car in the most harmless way possible and invited you over for dinner. I brought you here to talk to you, Isabella, because you're in danger. The only danger I'm in is from you." "No," he said, shaking his head slowly. "The danger is from the man you trust most in the world. The man who gave you everything. Your father." Isabella froze, his words hitting her like a physical blow. "My father? What are you talking about? My father is dead." "I know," Jack said softly, "but his ghost still runs your company. And his secrets are about to get you killed. Project Chimera isn't what you think it is." "It's a cloaking device," she said, her voice wavering. "A defensive technology." "That's what the prospectus says," he agreed. "But that's not its true purpose. Your father wasn't just an innovator, Isabella. He was an arms dealer. And Chimera isn't a shield. It's a weapon. A first-strike weapon that can make a warhead invisible. He sold it to the highest bidder, a rogue state with a grudge against the U.S. The deal is set to go through in less than 48 hours. And you, as the current CEO of Sterling Innovations, are the one they'll hold responsible." Her mind reeled. It was impossible. A lie. Her father was a philanthropist, a visionary. He wasn't a monster. But even as she tried to deny it, a sliver of doubt crept in. The late-night meetings she was never allowed to attend. The heavily encrypted files she could never access. The way her father would sometimes look at her with a sadness she never understood. "How do you know all this?" she whispered. "Who are you?" Jack stood up and walked over to the corner where his laptop sat. He opened it, typed a few commands, and turned the screen towards her. It was no longer displaying the satellite schematic. Instead, it showed a live feed from a high-altitude drone circling over a heavily fortified compound in a desert she didn't recognize. "I'm the one they sent to clean up your father's mess," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out not a wallet, but a small, sleek black device. He pressed his thumb to it, and a holographic insignia shimmered in the air above it, an eagle clutching a lightning bolt. It was the emblem of a clandestine government agency so secret, most people didn't believe it existed. "I was a ghost," he continued, his voice low. "My job was to fix problems like this before they started wars. Your father was my target, but he died before I could get to him. Now, the buyers are getting impatient. They know you're in charge, and they're coming for the tech. I disabled your car to get you off the grid, to keep you safe until I could neutralize the threat." Isabella stared at the hologram, then at his face. The grease-stained mechanic was gone. In his place was a man who radiated a quiet, lethal competence. A man who had seen things she couldn't even imagine. The room felt like it was closing in on her. Everything she thought she knew, every foundation of her life, was crumbling. Her father, her company, her own identity, it was all built on a lie. "Why didn't you just tell me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why all this charade?" "Because I didn't know if I could trust you," he said, his gaze intense. "I didn't know if you were a part of it. I had to see for myself. I had to see if there was any of the old Izzy left in you." The name hit her like a lightning bolt, a name she hadn't heard in 15 years. Izzy, the girl she used to be. The girl who ran away from home with a fake ID and a backpack full of dreams. The girl who had disappeared one night in Lisbon, leaving behind a past she had desperately tried to erase. "How?" she started, her throat tight with a sudden, suffocating fear. "How do you know that name?" He took a step closer, his eyes searching hers. "Because I was there, Izzy. I was there in Lisbon. You weren't the only one who had to disappear that night." Before she could process the impossible revelation, the world went dark. The lights in the house flickered and died, plunging them into absolute blackness. At the same moment, the distant sound of the diner's closing bell was replaced by a new sound, the low, menacing rumble of multiple vehicles approaching at high speed. Jax moved instantly, his body a blur of motion in the darkness. He grabbed her arm, his grip firm and unyielding. His other hand found the gun that had been taped under the table. "They found us," he said, his voice a deadly calm whisper in her ear. "The buyers. They are not waiting anymore." He pulled her towards the back of the house, his movements sure and swift in the unfamiliar darkness. "We have to go. Now." There was no time to think. No time to process the bombshell of Lisbon, the revelation of her father's treachery, or the gun now gripped firmly in Jax's hand. The world had narrowed to the suffocating darkness, the thunder of approaching engines, and the iron-strong grip on her arm pulling her through the house. "Stay low and stay quiet," Jax breathed, his voice a low command right next to her ear. The casual mechanic was gone, replaced by a soldier. He navigated the pitch-black house with an eerie familiarity, one hand on her, the other holding the gun, leading them towards the back. Isabella stumbled behind him, her expensive heels catching on the rug, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Fear was a cold, metallic taste in her mouth. Outside, car doors slammed, and harsh, guttural voices shouted in a language she didn't recognize. Jax didn't hesitate. He kicked open the back door and pulled her out into the cool night air. The moon was a pale sliver, offering little light. The yard was a maze of shadows and rusted metal. "This way," he whispered, pulling her not towards the road, but deeper into the junkyard, towards the garage. A beam of a powerful flashlight cut through the darkness, sweeping across the back of the house. They froze behind the hulking frame of a dead pickup truck, the light passing just feet from where they hid. Isabella held her breath, pressing herself against the cold, rusted metal. She could hear them now, their heavy boots crunching on the gravel as they surrounded the house. Jax leaned in close, his breath warm against her cheek. When I move, you run. Straight for the garage, back wall. There's a loose panel behind the tool chest. Don't stop for anything. You understand. She could only manage a terrified nod. Her life as Isabella Sterling, the untouchable CEO, had evaporated. She was Izzy again, the girl on the run, only this time the stakes were infinitely higher. Suddenly, a brilliant light erupted from the front of the house, followed by a deafening explosion that shook the ground. The men outside yelled in surprise and pain. Jax had set a trap. Go, he yelled, giving her a shove. Adrenaline surged through her. She ran, her mind blessedly blank, her body moving on pure instinct. She didn't look back. The sounds of gunfire erupted behind her, the sharp crack of Jax's handgun and the deeper, more powerful retort of automatic weapons. She reached the garage, her lungs burning, and fumbled for the door. It was unlocked. She slipped inside, the familiar smell of oil and gasoline a strange comfort in the chaos. The large tool chest stood against the back wall, just as he'd said. She threw her shoulder against it, grunting with the effort. It scraped against the concrete floor, revealing a dark, square opening in the wall. A tunnel. He had a goddamn escape tunnel. She didn't hesitate. She scrambled inside, the space tight and claustrophobic. It smelled of damp earth and secrets. She could still hear the gunfight outside, the sounds muffled now. She crawled forward on her hands and knees, her designer dress tearing, her palms scraping against the rough-hewn dirt. Where was he? Why wasn't he behind her? Panic seized her again. She stopped, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She couldn't leave him. Not after he'd told her the truth. Not after he'd saved her. Just as she was about to turn back, a dark shape filled the tunnel entrance behind her. It was Jax. He was breathing heavily, and in the faint light from the opening, she could see a dark stain spreading across his shoulder. I told you not to stop, he grunted, crawling in behind her and pushing the loose panel back into place, plunging them into absolute darkness. You're hurt, she whispered, her voice trembling. It's just a scratch, he said, his voice strained. We need to keep moving. They'll have the whole town locked down in minutes. He pushed past her, taking the lead again. The tunnel was longer than she expected, twisting and turning. Finally, she saw a faint glimmer of light ahead. It grew brighter until they emerged from a grate hidden beneath a thicket of desert scrub a good 100 yards from the garage. They were out. They were free. But they were in the middle of the vast, unforgiving desert. Jax leaned against a rock, clutching his shoulder. The bravado was gone, and she could see the pain etched on his face. She ripped a strip of fabric from her ruined dress and pressed it against the wound. We need to get you to a doctor, she said, her voice shaking. No doctors, he said through gritted teeth. They'll be looking for a man with a gunshot wound. He looked up at the stardusted sky. We need to get to higher ground. I have a cache hidden a few miles from here. Supplies, communication gear. He pushed himself off the rock, his body swaying. Can you walk? She nodded, though her legs felt like jelly. What about them? She asked, looking back towards the distant lights of the town. They'll be looking for our bodies in the fire, he said grimly. The explosion should buy us some time. But they'll figure it out eventually. They are professionals. They started walking, the silence of the desert a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. The only sound was the crunch of their feet on the sandy ground and Jax's ragged breathing. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions. Lisbon. How did he know about Lisbon? What happened that night? The memories were a blur, a haze of flashing lights, music, and a terror so profound she had buried it for 15 years. As they walked, a fragment of a memory surfaced, unbidden. A crowded nightclub, the scent of salt and cheap perfume. A young man with warm, intelligent eyes, laughing with her at a corner table. A man who looked impossibly like a younger version of Jax. The cafe, she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. By the river. You ordered black coffee. You said sugar was for amateurs. Jax stopped, turning to look at her in the dim moonlight. His face was a mask of surprise and something else, something she couldn't quite read. You remember, he said, his voice filled with a strange wonder. And then another memory hit her, sharper and more terrifying. The sound of shattering glass. Shouting. The young man grabbing her hand, his eyes wide with fear. They found me, Izzy. You have to run. Before she could ask him what it meant, a new sound cut through the desert night. The low, rhythmic thumping of a helicopter. A searchlight sliced through the darkness, sweeping across the desert floor, moving relentlessly towards them. They had run out of time. Down. Jax's voice was a harsh bark of command. He tackled her, pulling her down behind a cluster of jagged rocks just as the helicopter's searchlight washed over the spot where they had been standing. The powerful beam was blinding, turning the desert landscape into a stark world of black and white. The thumping of the rotor blades grew louder, a monstrous heartbeat that vibrated through the ground and into her bones. They were exposed, vulnerable. The rocks offered meager cover. Isabella pressed her face into the sand, her own heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. This was it. This was how it ended. They have night vision, Jax grunted, his body shielding hers. His weight was heavy, but reassuring. They'll see our heat signatures. We have to break the silhouette. He began to move, dragging her with him, staying in the deep shadows cast by the rock formation. It was slow, agonizing work. Every scrape of her shoes on the gravel sounded like a gunshot in the terrifying silence between the helicopter's passes. His breathing was shallow and ragged, and she knew his shoulder was causing him more pain than he let on. Lisbon, she gasped, the word a desperate plea for an explanation, for something to make sense in the madness. You were a ghost then, too? Is that why you ran? Not the time, Izzy, he bit out, his focus entirely on their survival. The searchlight swept back towards them. Move. He pushed her into a narrow crevice between two large boulders. It was a tight fit, the rough stone scraping her skin. Jax squeezed in behind her, his wounded shoulder bumping against the rock. He let out a sharp, involuntary hiss of pain. The helicopter hovered directly above them. Dust and sand rained down, stinging her eyes. She could feel the immense pressure of the air from the rotors, a physical weight pushing them down. They were so close, so close. Then, a voice, amplified by a loudspeaker, boomed from above. It was in the same foreign language she'd heard earlier. The words were meaningless to her, but the tone was unmistakable, cold, ruthless, and demanding. Jax went rigid beside her. He understood them. What are they saying? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engine. He didn't answer for a long moment. He was listening intently, his head cocked. They are not just looking for us, he finally said, his voice grim. They are looking for the Chimera prototype. They think you have it with you. The prototype? It's in a CQ vault in my R&D lab. They don't believe that. They think your father gave you a portable version. A failsafe. He shifted, his hand going to the gun tucked in his waistband. And they are not going to leave without it. The helicopter began to move again, its searchlight continuing its methodical sweep of the desert. They had a small window. The cache is in a cave system about a quarter-mile north of here, Jack said, his voice low and urgent. It's our only chance. When I say run, you run. Don't look back. Just run for that ridge over there. He pointed to a dark line of hills on the horizon. I'm not leaving you, she said, her voice fierce. The pampered CEO was gone, replaced by a woman who had been pushed too far. The old Izzy was clawing her way to the surface. A faint, pained smile touched his lips. Good. Then keep up. He waited, counting under his breath, timing the helicopter's pattern. The searchlight swept past them, moving east. Now! They burst from the cover of the rocks, running across the open desert. Isabella had never run so fast in her life. Her lungs burned, her legs ached, but she didn't slow down. She could hear Jax behind her, his footsteps heavy but steady. The helicopter banked sharply, turning back towards them. The thumping grew louder again. They were spotted. A spray of bullets kicked up sand just to her left. She screamed, stumbling, but Jax's hand was suddenly on her back, steadying her, pushing her forward. Don't stop, he yelled. They were so close to the ridge. Another 100 yards. 50. The entrance to the cave was a dark slash in the rock face, a promise of safety. Another burst of gunfire, closer this time. Jax cried out, his hand leaving her back. She risked a glance over her shoulder and her heart stopped. He was on the ground, clutching his leg. She skidded to a halt, turning back for him. Jax! Go! he roared, trying to push himself up, his face a mask of agony. Get to the cave. The helicopter was descending, preparing to land. Men were already preparing to rappel down. She wouldn't leave him. She couldn't. She ran back, grabbing his arm, trying to pull him up. I'm not leaving you. He looked at her, his eyes blazing with a desperate intensity. Lisbon, Izzy. Remember Lisbon. I pushed you into that alleyway. I told you to run and not look back. You listened to me then. You have to listen to me now. The memory hit her with the force of a physical blow. The alley, the shouting, the sound of a struggle. She had run, just like he'd told her to. She had run and never looked back, the guilt of it a secret she had carried for 15 years. I left you, she whispered, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the dust and sweat. You saved yourself, he corrected, his voice growing weaker. He pushed the gun into her hand. Now save us both. Get to the cache. There's a satellite phone. Call this number. My call sign is Ghost. Tell them Chimera is compromised. Tell them I'm sorry. The helicopter's skids touched the ground. Armed men were pouring out. Isabella looked from Jax's pale face to the approaching soldiers, then at the gun in her hand. Her past and present had collided in a storm of fire and blood. She had run once before. She wouldn't do it again. But he was right. Their only hope was the cache. She leaned down and kissed his forehead, a promise and a prayer. I'll be back for you, she whispered. Then, clutching the gun, she turned and ran for the cave, the sounds of the soldiers' shouts and Jax's defiant cry echoing behind her. Isabella plunged into the mouth of the cave, the sudden darkness a suffocating blanket after the harsh lights of the desert. The sounds of the firefight, the shouts, the gunfire, Jax's cry, were abruptly cut off, replaced by the frantic drumming of her own blood in her ears and the echo of her ragged breaths against cold stone. The gun felt alien in her hand, heavy and menacing. She was a woman who wielded spreadsheets and quarterly reports, not firearms. But the memory of Jax's face, pale and determined in the moonlight, fueled her. She scrambled deeper into the cave, her eyes struggling to adjust. It was a labyrinth of shadows, the air cold and still. She followed his last, desperate instructions, moving upward, climbing over slick, damp rocks. Her designer dress was in tatters, her hands and knees scraped raw. She was operating on pure adrenaline, the CEO stripped away to reveal the terrified, resilient girl she had once been. After what felt like an eternity, she saw it, a small, unnatural-looking pile of rocks tucked into an alcove. Her heart leaped. She tore at the rocks with her bare hands, her nails chipping, until she uncovered the corner of a hard, waterproof pelican case. With a final, desperate heave, she pulled it free. It was heavy. She clicked open the latches, her hands trembling so badly she could barely manage it. Inside, nestled in thick foam, was a treasure trove of survival, a rugged satellite phone, a compact first aid kit, a few protein bars, a canteen of water, and a small, sleek metallic device she didn't recognize. His words echoed in her head. Call this number. My call sign is Ghost. She grabbed the sat phone, its weight a small comfort, and powered it on. The screen flickered to life, displaying a set of coordinates and a full signal. She punched in the number he'd scrawled on a waterproof tag attached to the phone. It rang once, twice, then a clipped, no-nonsense voice answered. Go. There was no greeting, no identification. Just that single, expectant word. Isabella took a shaky breath, forcing the boardroom authority back into her voice. This is an associate of Ghost, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Project Chimera is compromised. I repeat, Chimera is compromised. Ghost is down. I need immediate extraction. She read the coordinates from the phone's display. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The silence stretched, amplifying the sound of her own frantic heartbeat. Ghost has been off-net for 5 years, the voice finally said, flat and suspicious. This line is for emergencies only. Identify yourself. They didn't believe her. They were going to leave them here to die. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. She had to make them listen. She had to prove she was real. What did she know? What could she say? Lisbon. Operation Nightingale, she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. Lisbon. 15 years ago. He was the primary asset. I was the collateral, the daughter of the target. He aborted the mission to get me out. My father's private security extracted me. He disappeared. She was betting her life and Jax's on a memory she barely understood. The silence on the other end was different this time. It was the silence of pure shock. When the voice returned, the suspicion was gone, replaced by a chilling urgency. Ms. Sterling, we are tracking your position. A recovery team is being mobilized. ETA is 20 minutes. I need you to confirm, was the Chimera prototype on your person? No. I told you, it's in a vault in California. Understood, the voice said, though she could hear the doubt. Stay where you are. Do not engage. Do not break radio silence. Help is on the way. The line went dead. 20 minutes. It might as well be a lifetime. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a hollow ache of terror. Jax, was he alive? Had they taken him? Or was? The thought was a physical pain. She squeezed her eyes shut, refusing to let the tears fall. Not yet. Her gaze fell on the other items in the case. She uncapped the canteen and took a long drink of water, the cool liquid a balm to her parched throat. Then her eyes landed on the strange metallic device she hadn't recognized. It was about the size of her phone, but heavier, made of a matte black alloy that seemed to absorb the light. Curiosity, a foolish, dangerous impulse, got the better of her. She picked it up. There was a small, almost invisible seam along one side. She pressed it, and the device hissed open. A tiny holographic projector whirred to life, casting a shimmering, blue-tinted image in the air above it. It was a complex, three-dimensional schematic. A schematic she recognized instantly. It was the core activation matrix for Project Chimera. It was the portable failsafe. The prototype. The blood drained from her face. It wasn't in the lab. It was here. It had been with her the whole time. But how? She never would have carried something so vital, so dangerous. Then she saw it. A small, almost imperceptible modification to the casing of the device. A tiny, engraved insignia, nearly invisible to the naked eye. It was her father's personal seal. He had planted it on her. He had put this weapon, this key to untold destruction, in her possession without her knowledge. Her designer handbag. The one she never went anywhere without. The one currently lying on the floor of a burnt-out motel room. Its frame was made of a special lead alloy. It would have shielded the device from any security scanner. It was a Trojan horse. Her father hadn't just been an arms dealer. He had made his own daughter the unwitting courier for his most dangerous secret. The trust she had in her father's memory, already fractured, shattered into a million pieces. And a new, colder suspicion wormed its way into her heart. Jax had told her the buyers thought she had the prototype. He'd told her they were wrong. Had he been lying to protect her? Or had he been lying to test her? Did he know all along that she was carrying the one thing everyone was willing to kill for? The man who had just saved her life, a man she had just started to trust, was once again a complete and terrifying enigma. The prototype felt like a block of ice in her hand, its coldness seeping into her skin, a physical manifestation of the chilling betrayals that were piling up around her. Her father, Jax. Her entire life had been a lie, meticulously crafted by men with deadly secrets. She deactivated the hologram, the precious schematic vanishing into the device. She now held the most dangerous object in the world, and she was trapped in a cave with enemies closing in. The 20-minute ETA for the recovery team was a countdown to a future she couldn't predict. Would they be saviors, or just another set of players in this lethal game? A noise from the mouth of the cave sent a fresh jolt of terror through her. The crunch of boots on gravel. They were searching the ridge. She scrambled deeper into the darkness, wedging herself into a narrow fissure, praying the shadows would be enough to hide her. She held her breath, listening. The voices were closer now, echoing slightly in the cave entrance. The harsh, foreign tongue of the soldiers, and another voice, speaking English. An American voice. It was calm, authoritative, and sickeningly familiar. Spread out. Search every cave and crevice, the voice commanded. She couldn't have gotten far. And find the operative. I want him alive, if possible. He has information. Isabella's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice. It was the voice of Marcus Thorne, the stoic, silver-haired head of her security detail. The man who had been a constant, reassuring presence in her life since her father's death. The man who had personally overseen her rescue from Lisbon 15 years ago. He was here, working with them. The foundation of her world, already shattered, was pulverized into dust. Marcus wasn't her protector. He was her jailer. He had been watching her for 15 years, not to keep her safe, but to keep the prototype safe. To ensure her father's monstrous legacy remained intact until the deal could be finalized. Her mind, reeling from the betrayal, flashed back to Lisbon. The chaos in the Fado Club. The young man she knew as Jax, fighting with a desperate, brutal efficiency. He wasn't just a student caught in the wrong place. He was a target, and the men he was fighting, they had the same cold professionalism as her father's security team. The memory sharpened, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. Her father hadn't sent Marcus to save her from a random street brawl. He'd sent him to retrieve her from a government agent who had gotten too close. Jax hadn't aborted his mission to save her. His mission was her. He was trying to get to her, to expose her father, and Marcus had stopped him. The narrative of her life, the one she had clung to for 15 years, was a lie. She wasn't the runaway who had been saved from her own recklessness. She was the target's daughter, the key, and Jax was the only one who had tried to tell her the truth. And now he was lying wounded in the desert, captured by the very man she had been taught to trust with her life. A cold fury, purer and stronger than any fear she had ever felt, washed over her. They had underestimated her. Her father, Marcus, even Jax. They all saw her as a pawn, a prize, the billionaire heiress in her gilded cage. They had no idea who she really was. They had forgotten about Izzy, the girl who had survived on her own in the backstreets of Europe, the girl who had learned to be a ghost herself. She looked at the prototype in her hand, then at the gun lying beside her. She had a choice. She could wait for the recovery team and hand over the weapon, trusting one set of shadowy figures over another. Or she could do something else. Something they would never expect. She checked the clip on the gun. It was full. She took the first aid kit from the case, stuffing it into the pockets of her ruined dress. She ate one of the protein bars, the manufactured taste a stark reminder of the artificial world she was leaving behind. The sounds outside were fading as Marcus and his team moved further down the ridge. It was the opening she needed. She wasn't going to wait to be rescued. She was going to get Jax back. And she was going to burn her father's empire to the ground. With the prototype secured in an inner pocket and the gun held firmly in her hand, Isabella Sterling crept out of the darkness of the cave and into the pale light of the desert dawn. The huntress had just become the hunter. The desert was a different world at dawn. The pale, horizontal light offered no shadows to hide in, turning the landscape into a vast, exposed stage. Isabella moved low and fast, her body screaming in protest, but her mind was a shard of ice, focused and clear. The Izzy who had learned to read cityscapes and navigate hostile territories was now reading the arroyos and rock formations, using the terrain to her advantage. She circled wide, keeping the ridge between herself and Marcus's search party. Her goal wasn't the cave anymore. It was the place where this had all begun, Jax's garage. It was a graveyard of fuel and flammable liquids, a powder keg waiting for spark. From a high vantage point, she could see the scene laid out below. The helicopter sat like a predatory insect near the road. A handful of armed men had set up a perimeter, and near the center of it all, Marcus Thorne stood over a kneeling figure. Jax. Even from this distance, she could see he was in bad shape. His head was bowed, but he wasn't broken. Two soldiers held him while a third, a medic, was crudely patching the wound in his leg, not out of compassion, but to keep him conscious for interrogation. Marcus leaned down, his voice too low to carry, but his posture was one of smug victory. He was a snake who had finally cornered his prey. The sight sent a fresh wave of venomous rage through Isabella. A direct assault was impossible. She was one woman with a handgun against a team of trained mercenaries, but she didn't need to defeat them. She just needed to create chaos. She remembered the layout of the junkyard, the way the ancient rusted cars were clustered together. She remembered the smell of gasoline. Her plan was desperate, reckless, and her only shot. She began to move again, a ghost in the dawn, making her way down the far side of the ridge. It was a slow, painstaking process, every step a calculated risk. She had to get close enough. She found her spot behind the skeletal remains of an old school bus, about 70 yards from the nearest cluster of junk cars. It was a long shot for a handgun, especially for a novice. But she wasn't a complete novice. Her father, in his twisted, paranoid way, had insisted she learn to shoot. A lady should be able to protect herself, Isabella. Another lie, another piece of his manipulative puzzle. She had hated the lessons, but now she was grateful for them. She rested the gun on a rusted-out window frame, steadying her hand. Her heart was a slow, heavy drum. She wasn't aiming for a person. She was aiming for a rust-pitted gas tank on a 1970s sedan, positioned perfectly to start a chain reaction. She thought of her flippant, cruel joke. "Fix this engine, and I'll marry you." A bitter laugh escaped her lips, a tiny, humorless puff of air. She was a world away from the woman who had said those words. That woman was weak, arrogant, and blind. This woman, the one sighting down the barrel of a gun, saw everything with perfect, painful clarity. She was fighting for the man she had mocked, the man who had seen the real her all along, the man who had lied to her. Yes, but only to protect her from a truth he didn't think she could handle. He was wrong. She lined up the shot. She controlled her breathing, just as the instructor had taught her all those years ago. In, out, find the center. She saw Marcus gesture to one of his men, who produced a syringe. They were going to drug Jax, take him somewhere far away where he would disappear forever. Time was up. She squeezed the trigger. The crack of the pistol was shockingly loud in the quiet morning air. The recoil jolted her arm. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Had she missed? Then a tiny spark bloomed on the side of the old sedan, followed by a dull whoomph as the gasoline vapors ignited. The initial whoomph was just the overture. A heartbeat later, the sedan's gas tank ruptured, and a geyser of fire roared 20 feet into the air. The concussion slammed into Isabella, nearly knocking her off her feet. The heat was instantaneous, a physical blow. The chaos she had prayed for was delivered with biblical force. The burning sedan was the first domino. The fire leaped to a neighboring pickup truck, its dry-rotted tires exploding like grenades. That blast, in turn, sent a shower of burning debris onto a pile of oil drums stacked against the garage wall. The result was a cataclysm. A series of deafening explosions ripped through the junkyard, each one more powerful than the last, creating a wall of fire and thick, black smoke that blotted out the morning sun. Down below, Marcus's professional operation disintegrated into primal panic. The soldiers, caught completely off guard, scrambled for cover. The two men holding Jax were thrown to the ground by the force of the blasts. Marcus himself was knocked backward, his smug authority replaced by a mask of disbelief and rage. This was her moment. While their eyes were on the inferno, Isabella was already moving, sprinting from the cover of the bus, using the thick, rolling smoke as her shield. The gun was still in her hand, but her target was no longer a gas tank. It was Jax. He had reacted instantly. The moment the first explosion rocked the yard, he moved. Ignoring the searing pain in his leg and shoulder, he slammed his elbow into the face of the disoriented guard beside him and lunged for the other's weapon. He was a professional, wounded but not helpless. He came up with an assault rifle in his hands just as Isabella burst through the smoke. Their eyes met across the fiery chaos. There was no time for words. There was only a shared, desperate understanding. He saw the gun in her hand, the cold fire in her eyes, and he knew. This wasn't the billionaire heiress he'd been trying to protect. This was Izzy, and she had come back for him. The chopper, he yelled over the roar of the flames, his voice raw. Marcus was back on his feet, screaming orders, trying to rally his men. He saw Isabella, and his face contorted with fury. Get her. She has the prototype. The remaining soldiers turned their attention from the fire to her, raising their weapons. But Jax was already providing cover fire, short, controlled bursts that forced them to duck back behind the helicopter. Isabella didn't hesitate. She ran to him, grabbing his arm, and half-dragged, half-supported him as they limped towards the helicopter. The heat was scorching, and the air was thick with acrid smoke that burned her lungs. I thought I told you to wait for the recovery team. Jax gasped, leaning heavily on her. And I thought you were just a mechanic, She shot back, a grim smile touching her lips. Looks like we were both wrong. They reached the helicopter. The pilot was slumped over the controls, either unconscious or dead from the initial blasts. That was a problem for later. Right now, they needed to get inside. Marcus and two of his men broke from cover, charging them. Thorn! Isabella yelled, her voice cutting through the din. She pulled the Chimera prototype from her pocket, holding it up for him to see. It's over. Call them off. Marcus skidded to a halt, his eyes wide, fixed on the device in her hand. He had gambled everything on possessing it, and now it was just out of his reach, held by the woman he had so thoroughly underestimated. Give it to me, Isabella, he said, his voice dangerously soft. Don't be a fool. You have no idea what you're holding. I know exactly what I'm holding, she retorted, her voice dripping with ice. I'm holding my father's sins, and your leash. She backed into the open door of the helicopter, pulling Jax in with her. You have two choices. You walk away and disappear, or I press the big red button on this thing. I'm assuming there is one, and we all find out what happens next. It was a bluff. She had no idea how to activate it. But in her eyes, Marcus saw not the frightened girl from Lisbon, but the ruthless CEO of Sterling Innovations, and he believed her. He saw a woman who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. For a moment, he hesitated. Then, from the sky, came a new sound. The deep, powerful thrum of military-grade helicopters. Not one, but three, swooping in from the north, black and menacing against the morning sky. The recovery team. Marcus's face broke into a triumphant, ugly smile. Looks like you're out of time, Ms. Sterling, he sneered. Your friends are here. But as the lead helicopter landed, the men who rappelled down were not wearing the insignia of Jax's agency. They were dressed in sterile, unmarked black tactical gear, their faces hidden by visors. They moved with an inhuman efficiency, their weapons not pointed at Marcus, but at everyone. The voice on the sat phone had said, "Help is on the way." But looking at the cold, impartial soldiers surrounding them, their weapons trained on her, on Jax, and on Marcus's terrified men, Isabella realized her fatal mistake. She hadn't called for a recovery. She had called for a clean-up crew. And they weren't here to save anyone. They were here to sanitize the scene, to erase the problem. And right now, everyone in this junkyard was part of the problem. The world devolved into a three-way standoff in a vortex of fire, smoke, and rotor wash. The cleanup crew formed a perfect, merciless circle, their weapons level, trapping Marcus's men and the two of them in the middle. There was no negotiation in their posture, no hesitation. They were a force of nature, an antibody sent to purge an infection. Izzy, get in the cockpit. Jax yelled, shoving the assault rifle he held into her hands. You have to fly. Fly? I can't fly a helicopter, she screamed back, the absurdity of the command hitting her even in the midst of the chaos. You're about to learn, he roared, pushing her towards the front. He slumped into the co-pilot's seat, his face ashen from pain and blood loss. He pointed a trembling finger at the instrument panel. That's the throttle. That's the collective. Just get us off the ground. Outside, the standoff broke. The cleanup crew opened fire, not with the wild panic of Marcus's men, but with the chilling, coordinated precision of a firing squad. Marcus's mercenaries were cut down in seconds. Marcus himself, the great traitor, took a round to the chest and fell without a sound, his life's ambitions ending in a cloud of desert dust. Bullets stitched across the fuselage of their helicopter. The cockpit glass crazed, then shattered. Isabella screamed, ducking low as shards flew past her head. Now, Izzy, now. Jax's voice was a lifeline. With a sob of pure terror, she grabbed the controls. Her hands closed around the collective, and she pulled. The helicopter lurched violently, lifting a few feet off the ground, then slamming back down with a bone-jarring crash. Easy. Jax grunted, his hands flying over the controls, compensating for her panicked movements. Feel it. Don't fight it. She took a breath, the world narrowing to the instrument panel and Jax's voice. She pulled again, slower this time, more deliberate. The helicopter rose, unsteady and lurching, but it was airborne. She pushed the throttle, and the burning junkyard fell away below them as they surged forward, away from the firefight. They were flying. It was a clumsy, terrifying wobble. But they were flying. You lied to me, she said, her voice flat, her eyes locked on the horizon. The adrenaline was keeping her functional, but the betrayals were a cancer in her heart. You knew I had the prototype. Jax coughed, a wet, ragged sound. I suspected, he admitted, his voice a whisper. Your father was a paranoid man. He wouldn't have left his most valuable asset in a vault. He'd put it with his other most valuable asset. He looked at her, his eyes clouded with pain but clear with sincerity. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to have to make the choice. I wanted to get it, neutralize it, and let you go back to your life. I wanted Isabella Sterling to be safe. I didn't want to drag Izzy back into the fire. His words were another explosion, this one in her soul. He hadn't lied to manipulate her. He had lied to protect her, to preserve the gilded cage she had built for herself because he thought it was what she wanted. You were wrong, she said softly. There is no Isabella Sterling. Not anymore. A warning light flashed on the console, followed by a high-pitched alarm. A plume of black smoke started trailing from their engine. They had taken more hits than they realized. We're going down, Jack said, his voice dangerously calm. He was losing the fight to stay conscious. Isabella scanned the landscape below. A ribbon of black asphalt snaked through the desert, and on it, a single vehicle was cruising, a long, black limousine. It was insane. It was impossible. It was their only chance. There, she said, pointing. Jax followed her gaze. He gave a weak, delirious laugh. You have got to be kidding me. He grabbed the controls, fighting the dying helicopter. Hold on tight, Izzy. This is going to hurt. The world became a blow of sand and sky, the scream of the failing engine, and Jax's strained grunts as he wrestled the machine towards the road. He brought them down hard, a controlled crash that was still violent enough to shatter what was left of the cockpit and send them spinning across the desert floor. The last thing Isabella saw before everything went black was the limousine screeching to a halt just yards from their wreckage. She came to with the smell of gasoline and burning rubber in her nostrils. Rain had begun to fall, hissing against the hot metal. She was lying on the wet asphalt, pushed clear of the worst of the wreckage. Through a haze of pain and confusion, she saw the limousine, its front end crumpled against the twisted frame of the helicopter. And then she saw him, a figure, silhouetted against the flames, rising from the driver's seat of the limo. He was a specter of soot and blood, but he was alive. She stumbled to her feet, her whole body an agony of bruises, and ran to him as the first sirens wailed in the distance. He leaned against the ruined car, a ghost of his familiar, infuriating smirk on his face. Jax, she breathed, her voice breaking. She reached out, her hand hovering over his chest, afraid to touch him, afraid he might break. I'm sorry. The apology was for everything. For the joke. For her blindness. For the 15 years she had left him to the wolves while she lived a lie. He coughed, a pained grimace flashing across his face before the smirk returned. Does this mean, he wheezed, his eyes locking with hers, full of a meaning that transcended the chaos around them, that the engine's fixed? The engine, not her car. The whole corrupt, broken machine her father had built. The machine she had just helped him dismantle. Tears streamed down her face, washing away the soot and the grime. She finally understood. She took his greasy, blood-stained hand in hers, her grip firm, her promise absolute. Yes, she whispered as the flashing lights grew closer, painting them in red and blue. It is. A deal's a deal.